Every year I know we gonna go hard. We been that team ever since Bart started. All my cheese heads go pack go. Ain't show with no mercy, cutting no slack, no. I ain't a bad sport and I'll even wish you good luck. Only thing I will.
Hey, good evening. Welcome into Lombardi's Legends podcast. I am Wags, and joining me as always is Dane. We're recording here on a Monday night, last week of February. Finally have an opportunity to connect here, do a little bit of a recap of the end of the Packers 2024 season, and we figured perfect timing to look ahead at the offseason, do a little bit of preview for Packers offseason needs, maybe a little discussion on some of the Packers free agents and likelihood that they come back this year, and maybe look ahead around some of the free agents around the league. But Dane, first of all, before we dive into that, man, how you doing? How have you been since the end of the Packer season, man?
Hey, good to be on. Hi, everybody. Disappointing end to the season. Kind of went out with a whimper, that's for sure. But you know, some reason for optimism, of course, too. But doing well. Excited to start talking off season. I mean, this is definitely an opportunity for the team to retool this off season. So just Wags, I'm excited to get into it and talk a little bit about you know, how this team can improve going into 2025.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think maybe just to start with, let's take a look back at the 2024 season, and more broadly, we don't need to do like a deep dive into everything that went right, anything that went wrong. But as you look at 2024 as a whole, what are some of the themes that definitely emerged that you think will be a big part of this offseason? So, Dane, I'm going to start with one, and then maybe you can respond to that and kick it back to me. So there's a number of things that I think we could talk about. I'm just going to address the elephant in the room right off the bat, and that's cornerback one, Jaire Alexander. And it looks like all signs indicate he might have played his last down as a Packer in 2024, not a free agent. So the Packers would need to exercise other methods to move on from Jaire, if indeed that does happen. But there seems to be a lot of talk from Packers media, and there seems to be some acknowledgement from sources within the organization that Jaire's days seem to be numbered, that Packers may be looking to move on. Jaire himself said at the end of the season that he didn't expect to be back. So I ask you, what does that mean for this Packers defense? And what does that mean for how the Packers might make some priorities as they head into this offseason? Because you can say what you want. I know you've been kind of up and down, mostly down, frankly, in the last couple seasons on Jaire. But that's still big shoes to fill potentially if they move on. And certainly it's not going to be an easy thing to just figure out what they do to address the needs that might create. So, Dane, what are your thoughts overall? Are we indeed going to be headed down the road of Jaire moving on from the Packers? And if so, what does that look like from the Packers' perspective?
You know, Wags, it feels like it. It feels like this is probably it for Jaire in Green Bay. Certainly at his cap number, I think he's on the books for like $17 million. There's no chance he's coming back to Green Bay under that number. The challenge here is this. Jaire didn't play a lot of football last year, actually really the last couple of years. And I thought the Packers defense really improved last season, but man, I think they could have been a lot better if Jaire was on the field. And that's just an honest assessment. So, you know, it's a hard pill to swallow to see him go. If indeed that does happen, as you mentioned, Wags, he's not a free agent. So either the team will try to trade him under that cap number. It's going to be pretty tough to trade him realistically, or potentially the Packers cut him either you know, potentially as a post-June cut to spread out the money, and that would be really hard pill for me to swallow as a Packers fan, as frustrated as I've been with Jaire Alexander over the last couple of seasons to cut him loose. He can still play ball at a really high level. I think my frustration comes from the injuries, and I think some of the internal scuttlebutt has been that the Packers potentially have been frustrated with his inability to play through injury. So I might share a little of that as well. But all of that is to say he's a tremendous talent, right? And when he's on the field, he plays really, really good football more often than not. So if the Packers move on from Jaire Alexander, it's a huge hole for this Packers defense. With all due respect to Kayshawn Nixon and to Carrington Valentine, I mean, Eric Stokes is also a free agent. I'm not certain he's back. I'd be pretty surprised, in fact, if he does come back to Green Bay. So all of a sudden, we've got K9, we've got Carrington Valentine, but a lot of holes at the cornerback position. Now, the Packers showed last season they're not afraid to completely remake a position group through free agency and draft. They did that at safety last year and were very successful at it. Is that what the Packers have an appetite to do again this year? It's unclear what's going to happen, but regardless if Jaire is back or not, I do see the Packers reassessing and kind of retooling a little bit in the cornerback room. But if Jaire Alexander does, in fact, leave Green Bay this offseason, the Packers cut him or are able to find a trade partner, then it is going to be a wholesale change in the cornerback room, and the Packers are going to have to be extremely active, probably a mix of both free agency and the draft. And the Packers, as we'll talk about, have other needs. So it's not like this is the only need. So there's only so many places you can sink your resources. So it is a conundrum, I think, for this Green Bay Packer front office right now.
Yeah, it is certainly. And I think it's one of those things too that there's no easy pathway, as you said. If they cut Jaire pre-June 1st, it's almost 7 million in cap savings, but it's a huge dead cap hit of I think 17 million in 2025, 19 million in 2026. So those are things just to keep an eye on. It's the same if they try to execute a trade period post June 1st. So I think trade gets really complicated. The good news is, Dane, is even though those can be really, really challenging numbers for a Packer fan to be looking at, we do have a lot more flexibility under the cap than we have in past off seasons heading into this one. It doesn't mean I'm excited to just add a bunch of money to the dead cap number right off the bat with someone like Jaire. But, if they need to just cut their losses in some respects, I think the other factor we didn't mention is there seems to have been a divide in the Packers locker room at some point this season. I don't know when exactly that happened, but reading through the lines, and it's easy to speculate from the outside in. I don't think there was anything obvious that's come out about that. But Dane, am I off on that? And would it be off base to speculate that Jaire could have been a big part of said divide in the Packer locker room? And this could almost be a case of the Packer players in the locker room policing themselves a bit. And I think could be a good chance, I think, to be honest, for Jaire and the organization, just get a change of scenery and a change of direction at that position.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think you're probably right in there, and I don't want to speculate too much, right? I don't know. We weren't in the locker room, but it does seem like more so this year than maybe in the last couple of years, which is remarkable with all the Aaron Rodgers drama and other things. But it did seem like there was a bit of a fracture in the locker room, especially as the season wore on. And, I think that's something that the Packers need to address and I think are addressing. I mean, Matt LaFleur, he's got some things that I think we look sideways sometimes with him, but he has overall been really, really good, I think, at being able to manage personalities. We saw it with Romeo Dobbs. We've seen it with a bunch of other talented players over the years, and LaFleur has been able to, I think, manage that talent. But at the same time, even if you're extremely talented, if you're not on the field as much as the Packers would like you to be, and there's some locker room concerns, which may or may not be the case with Jaire. I mean, those are two big, stack against situations for I don't care who you are. If you're not playing a lot of ball and maybe there's some cause for concern behind the scenes, then that would potentially motivate the Packers to move on. It remains to be seen. I mean, I think we're all going to be kind of waiting and seeing on this one. But Wags, I do expect the Packers we're going to know sooner rather than later. Free agency's around the corner. The draft, of course, is in April. So, the Packers are going to have to make a move sooner rather than later on this one.
Yeah, Dane. All right. So I think theme number 2. I know we said we're gonna kick it back and forth, but I feel like it was my turn to
Oh,
talk. So
good.
here we go. Inconsistency on the defensive line. At times this year, we got a lot of pressure. I think overall, the defensive line did much better in stopping the run over the course of this season. But just seems to be too many occasions where they weren't able to generate pressure on the opposing quarterback and really make an impact. And those were typically the games that we didn't do as well defensively. No surprise there. We saw in the Super Bowl, it seems like every few years we get a team like the Eagles that just get a dominant performance from a defensive line. It's easy to overreact, but it's also easy to forget how important having a really, really good defensive front is. And an offensive lines, it's everywhere in the trenches for that matter, to advancing and building a championship caliber team. So, Dane, on this one, not to speak for you, I don't think we're too far off, but what are your thoughts here on defensive line? We already got rid of Jason Rebovich, defensive line coach from 2024. So what other changes do you think are in store up front for the Packers to try to make that next step and having a more dominant defense in the trenches?
Yeah, so the first thing I'll say is I thought Rashawn Gary got more and more comfortable in this new 4-3 defense as the season wore on. One thing that I've seen kicked around a lot, and it is intriguing to me, is the percentage of time Rashawn Gary's on the field. And he is on the field a lot less than a lot of other end rushers in the league. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, unfortunately, but significantly on the field less than others, and guys that are making his pay and guys that are expected to make the impact that Rashawn, I think we expect him to make here in Green Bay. So I do wonder if going into next year, I mean the 4-3 defense, the transition, Rashawn, coming off some injury stuff, like, is this a year where he ramps it up a little bit more? I would like to see him. I get out there a little bit more, play a little bit more snaps, I think, on one end. And I get that you're rotating guys in and out, but I'd like to see that. I think Lucas Van Ness, Wags, this is a make or break year for Van Ness. High draft pick by the Packers. Just didn't really make the impact in year 2. I thought he played better in year 1 than he did in year 2. And he needs to make more impact plays, I think. Even once Preston Smith was traded away to Pittsburgh for a 7th round pick, I think I anticipated, at least, I don't want to speak for any other fans, I anticipated Lucas Van Ness was going to get the lion's share of snaps, and that just didn't come to fruition. So Lucas Van Ness, I mean, this is his chance, I think, really, for the Packers to do that. Brenton Cox, Wags, showed, I thought, a lot of talent in a small window. Especially once Preston Smith left, he went from a weekly healthy scratch, to playing meaningful snaps, and I thought got a lot of good pressure and got after the quarterback quite a bit. So that was something that's intriguing. I'd like to see him grow on that. I like JJ Barre. He's a great guy to mix in there. But Wags, what it really comes down to, and Aaron Mosby, I thought, played some good snaps too. But I do think, Wags, this is, I mentioned cornerback and we mentioned cornerback. This is another need scenario, I think, for the Packers, whether it's interior, and I'm talking about edge right now, kind of these ends, but whether it's interior or exterior, I'd like to see the Packers invest in a draft pick, and an early draft pick, whether it's interior or at the edge. We saw it with Philadelphia. I always go back to those old Giants teams as well that just kept sending pass rushers and were just violent at the point of attack. I would love to see the Packers mix another guy in there, whether it's somebody that can clog the middle or otherwise. Kenny Clark earned his 3rd contract. But he's not going to be getting any younger as we progress. TJ Slayton's a free agent. Remains to be seen what happens with TJ. Devontae Wyatt, I thought really was coming up, hit an injury wall. But it never hurts to have another guy mixed in there, right? That can make an impact. And sometimes, whether it's in the interior or the exterior, that guy that can just be a wrecking ball and cause trouble. The Packers are really missing, I think, that core guy that can just wreak havoc. And we see other teams that have had success doing that and have had success doing that against Green Bay. Now, listen, folks, they don't grow on trees, right? And the Packers, to their credit, have drafted high a lot in the if you look across the defensive line. I mean, Devontae Wyatt was a first round pick. Kenny Clark was an early round pick. Rashawn Gary, Lucas Van Ness, right? Like, I could list guys that were first round picks from Green Bay, but it never hurts to keep replenishing that. So, Wags, I really think going into this year, we really turned a curve stopping the run this year. I thought Hafley's defense did a tremendous job of that. The tackling was so much better in Green Bay defensively this year as well. But where we turned the curve on stopping the run, we had a heck of a lot harder time in getting after the quarterback consistently. And so I think it's going to need to be a little bit of in-house development, and it's also going to have to probably bring in another fresh guy or two that can help this Packers defensive line kind of get over the hump. I think we're close, but one more guy would really, really, I think, help us get across that finish line a little bit more.
Yeah, I really couldn't agree more. And I think we could combine this with supplementing in the draft. Yeah, but I would love to see the Packers get out there and acquire someone that's more of a proven commodity. I think we've got a lot of guys that could be filling that up and coming talent void. And I expect them to bring more in through the draft process. But I'd really love to have someone that we know can come in and make an impact and has proven it on a consistent basis at this level. So we'll see what happens there. Dane, theme number 3, one that's near and dear to your heart. I'm just going to throw it out there: special teams. We've got a couple of specialists that are free agents. Now, granted, Danny Whelan is exclusive rights free agent, but Brandon McManus, we finally, I think, found a kicker despite a little bit of a struggle there towards the end of the season. But honestly, as a unrestricted free agent, it'll be interesting to see how that goes. And also, it looks like we're going to need a new return man, as Keyshawn Nixon has said he has no interest in doing that job. And I'd also be curious, a side note, for your thoughts on that. The Packers paid Keyshawn Nixon like he is going to be a specialist, and that's one of the main reasons they bought him back. I think last offseason had a down year in that role, but played better than I think we expected as in the cornerback position. So one could say he's outperformed his contract in some ways and underperformed his contract in other ways. But regardless, we could really be either remaking special teams quite a bit with some of those primary specialists, or we could be bringing some of these guys back and potentially maybe it's just a one or two slight or minor changes. So what are your thoughts overall as to where Packers are positioned from a special team perspective, and what changes you expect or what you'd like to see in the special teams room?
I mean, I give a lot of credit to the Packers front office. I've said it before, I'll say it again. They cycled through a ton of kickers last offseason and into the regular season, but they understood that they weren't good enough and they needed to get better. And they finally found somebody in McManus. A little bit down near the end of the year, but Wags, I'm actually curious. I want to put it back on you for a second. How critical is it for Green Bay to re-sign McManus? I mean, we have, I think, 11 free agents, true free agents out there. I would probably rate him as number 1 for the most important of all of the guys out there. But what say you?
I mean, he's got to be up there with how unstable that position had been before he came in. And I mean, look, the dude, I think he's going to be 34. So he should be fine to kick at a pretty high level, I would think, for at least a couple more years. At least kickers can last a long time, but I, why mess around with this if you're the Packers? Honestly, I I don't know. What's an overpay for a kicker? Maybe like an extra 800,000 a
Right.
year, more than what the market might say is worth. So the thing is it's worth more to the Packers right now than it is to most other teams. So I agree with you as far as where he rates and most important of the Packers free agents to sign. I don't know. If you think he's number one, I guess that's fine. We don't have a lot of free agents that I think are really high priority when you look at the list. And we can kind of peek through it in a minute. There's guys I'd love to bring back. Don't get me
Right.
wrong, but I'm not going to lose too much sleep over it if the Packers, move on from a few guys. It's bound to happen as part of the business. And maybe some of these guys find a nice opportunity to get a little bit more playing time, a little bit more money elsewhere. So you can't really fault them for that. So this is a two-way street, but certainly I think with the McManus situation, I think some of the special teams ratings we were talking about it were a little bit, deceptive in some ways because of the instability of the kicker position early in the season, as well as just there's things with return that I think the Packers need to look long and hard at the offseason, what their strategy is in their return game. Overall, I thought their coverage was really good this season, better than I think in many of the past few seasons. And once McManus came in, for the most part, he was pretty much lights out from the kicking position. So it's really, really tough to argue with who they had there, specialists. And obviously Whelan, exclusive rights, that's a no-brainer. They're going to bring that dude back. He had a great year. So I like that 1-2 punch with Whelan and McManus. So let's see what they can do to make that happen.
Yeah, the return scenario, the returners are kind of the key there, right? You said it, I think, best, right? Nixon doesn't seem to have interest in doing it. They had a tough year to begin with anyway. Wags, I'll be honest, I'm kind of done with the between Jaden Reed and K9 returning punts at this point. I think Jaden Reed's way too valuable offensively, and I don't need a starting corner returning punts either, if I'm being honest. And K9 realistically is going to be playing some very meaningful snaps defensively, and it's so I think the Packers need to address that position as a returner. The kickoff return has basically become insignificant in today's rules. Maybe a couple returns a season, but that really isn't as impactful as it was even 2 seasons ago. But punt return is still something that the Packers haven't taken one to the house in a extremely long time. I can't even remember the last time. Has it been a decade since the Packers took one back on punt? I mean, it's been that long, I think. But it'd be nice to maybe have somebody else out there that isn't as critical offensively or defensively, that can concentrate a little bit more as a return man and a little bit more on special teams than being, somebody that is, if they go down, it's a critical situation offensively or defensively.
I completely agree. I'm eating up what you're saying. All right, next theme, and then we're going to do one more after this, Dane, I think, before wrapping it up tonight. This next one is like catnip for Packer fans. Do we need a number one receiver? Now, just looking at the end of the season, it's certainly, you can point to some injuries and some things that we're dealing with. We've got a lot of talent. I think everybody understands we've got a lot of talent. We've got guys that can get the job done at that wide receiver position. I'm wondering, though, we had Josh Jacobs come out and say he loves the talent there, but he thinks they should go and get a proven number one guy. I think he was singing to the choir with a lot of Packer fans. I think one other factor that'll be interesting to consider is, all of the guys that we had, all the young guys that we have, we're not going to pay all of those, and not because we wouldn't even want to. You can argue the merits of who deserves what, but because it's just not realistic that they will. They're going to have to make decisions. And I think with the way things were shaping up over the course of this season, I think those decisions are getting clearer and clearer. I think Jaden Reed is definitely
one of the guys. And then, it's just going to be an interesting thing to consider, who else after that, with the rest of that young crop of receivers that we have. I think you can make a lot of arguments in a few different ways, but it doesn't make sense with the Packers having a opening of some cap space right now to go out, get aggressive, see if they can land a number one guy, pay him for 2-3 seasons, and then, depending on where they're at, they can resign him, or that they can kind of reallocate some of the money that they have to someone else in that wide receiver room. So it's really cool to say, oh yeah, our receivers make a combined like $8 million a year, or whatever it was last year. But I think realistically, they're going to have to start thinking about how they allocate some of the funds to this group. But what say you? Do the Packers need a quote unquote proven number one receiver? And should that be something that they are trying aggressively to address this offseason as well?
Yes, is the answer. And I'm not normally the one to say that kind of thing. I've never been a draft first round receiver guy. Any of that stuff. But I think of a couple of years ago when the Titans traded AJ Brown to the Eagles. And I just use them as an example right now. Can you imagine AJ Brown in Green Bay right now? Jordan Love would just be happier. Right? I mean, that's the reality. I agree. Jaden Reed, it's very clear. Jaden Reed is going to be in Green Bay longer term. But here's the reality, I think, that the Packer fans need to take into account. And Christian Watson, that knee injury looks devastating. It's not fair, but it's a reality. He's had injury issues prior to that. And then now this, it's really hard to see the Packers being able to, expect him to be out there for the start of the season, and B, invest big dollars in him until, they see how he bounces back. But even then, I'm not sure if that's going to ever really come to fruition. It's not fair, but it's a reality. Romeo Doubs, 2 head injuries now. And the first one you go, okay, right, that happens. But the second one, the way it happened, that's cause for concern for me. And between the head injury and Romeo earlier in the year, feeling fairly disgruntled enough that, he didn't play in a ball game, that's a cause for concern. And I don't know if you can rely on Romeo Doubs right now. Again, is it fair? Probably not, but I'm looking at the reality. So really what we're looking at is Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks, who I still am very high on. I like him a lot. I really, then it's like the Bo Mountains of the world and all these other guys. Wags, it'd be really nice to get a number one wide receiver. Okay. They can stretch the field. They can make quarterbacks way more comfortable. And can you imagine the Packers having a tried and true number one, putting Jaden Reed in the slot, Dontavian Wicks on the other side, and then having Tucker Kraft in there with Josh Jacobs? It makes the offense significantly better. So whether it's DK Metcalf, I mean, there's all these names that are getting floated around. I'm not one to always give up draft capital. And in fact, I rarely want to. But in this scenario right now, the Packers invested handsomely in Jordan Love. The offensive line looked pretty darn good, I thought, largely last season. There's a lot of really good pieces there. What gets this offense over the top? I think it's a game-changing wide receiver. Again, they don't grow on trees, but man, it'd be nice to have a wide receiver one in Green Bay.
All right, Dane, I'm going to steal a comment here from Wayne as our last theme. If the Packers go out and acquire a big name, either in free agency or trade, he's got a list of a few guys, but if you want to choose someone else out there that you've had your eye on, Wayne, thanks for the comment here. If we can get, I'm assuming you mean Joey Bosa from Chargers, Max Crosby, T. Higgins, Myles Garrett. He doesn't know who you'd go with, but Dane, if you had to choose someone from that list, or maybe someone off that list that is just, man, could you imagine getting this guy? What are your thoughts? Does the Packers have a play, and how excited would you get if they were able to bring in a big name guy like this to pair with who they have on the roster currently?
Yeah, and I want to hear your answer too, Wags. So Max Crosby will always stand out to me because he blew up the Packers a couple years ago. That's the reason for me why he's somebody that stands out. You know who I really like, though, is the kid from the Bengals, Henderson, I think it is, the big defensive lineman, I think he's 91. over there. He's a guy that I'm casually will watch AFC games, and dude just is a game wrecker. So he's a guy that I really like. Also really would like DK Metcalf. I mentioned him. I think he fits the Green Bay vibe. He's a big physical receiver. He's a guy that can stretch the field. He can come up with big plays. He's also going to lay the wood and throw some blocks, which Green Bay really likes. So I think he fits that a little bit. So those are probably two of my guys. But yeah, Wags, I wouldn't cry with any of the guys on this list. Max Crosby be pretty darn nice too.
Yeah, Dane, I gotta echo Max Crosby. I mean, certainly T. Higgins. It'll be interesting to see how much money that guy's going to command. Just looking, guys at wide receiver were getting like 30 million a year last year. Is that going to be the market for this season and moving forward, or is it going to go up even higher? I mean, that just seems like a crazy number to me. Certainly. T. Higgins, I look at as someone with a ton of talent. I don't know if he's worth that much money. So Agreed. If he's the guy at the top of the wide receiver market, I wouldn't be too disappointed if the Packers look elsewhere and try to use their money for someone else or their resources for someone else that maybe makes a little bit more sense and can have is a true blue chipper that can make that impact. So I certainly think Max Crosby is someone that fits that bill. Joey Bosa, I want to stay away from. We've got a lot of guys in the past that we've had money tied up into with injury histories. So why bring in someone that they haven't invested in, specifically? That's another team's problem as far as I'm concerned. Myles Garrett, I think that's going to take too much to try to acquire or more than the Packers are typically, interested in partying with. But certainly I would love to, as I said earlier, I think especially in the defensive front, I'd love to bring in someone proven that can supplement additional talent that they bring in through the draft this season. So I don't know if I have a specific name on this list, Dane, but when I see this list of names, all of these guys are fine players that certainly you'd be excited to have on the team, but you just wonder a little bit at the opportunity cost that it would take for the Packers to be able to bring in any of these guys. But certainly I think just on paper, of course, I'd love to have any of them. So.
Wags, I wanted to ask you, do you think, like, of any free agent position-wise, like a rusher, do you think? Is that something that would probably be the most ideal? I think it is for me, so I'm curious for you.
Yeah, I think so. I think any combination of a rusher and I think a defensive tackle is a big need. Yeah. Kenny Clark didn't have his best season last year, but he's also getting to stage of his career. He's not that old, just to be clear, but he's also getting to that age of his career that I think it makes sense that the Packers invest in who that next guy can be to anchor the interior defensive line. I don't know that they have that answer for who the next guy is after Kenny Clark on the roster currently. So I would be interested to see how the Packers can try to address that. And, certainly we've seen some things and we saw some promise this season at times from some of the guys on the roster. But I think that would be kind of the combination I'd love to see. The Packers either address defensive tackle through free agency or in the draft, and then vice versa. But on the outside with a rusher. So either bring in an experienced rusher, bring in an experienced defensive tackle, and then invest highly in the draft and the other side of the defensive line.
Love it. Love it. Is there any other, did you have anything else, Wags? Any of these pressure points? I like these flash points tonight.
Yeah, I think that covers the themes that I had so far. Yeah. I think, Dane, let's not wait so long. It's been a minute, right? We can come back and do a little reaction, prepare for some of the actual signings as this heats up a little bit, heading into free agency, and I think we'll certainly want to get some reaction if the Packers are as involved as we expect them to be. So we'll be around the corner coming back and talking about this in more detail and maybe some more specific guys that we might be targeting. But I think that about covers the themes that we wanted to touch on for this episode.
Yeah. So Wags, I mean, everybody can find us wherever you get your podcasts, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, everywhere else. So it's an absolute joy. We're going to be back all off season long. We've got already talking with guys about interview prospects. It's going to be, so we're going to have some Packer players on again this off season, which is going to be a ton of fun. And we'll be covering this team all off season long.
Absolutely. So as always, thanks for joining, and be legendary, and go Pack go.
Go Pack go.
Every year I know we gonna go hard. We been that team ever since Bart started. All my cheese heads go Pack go. Ain't showing no mercy, cutting no slack, no. I ain't a bad sport and I'll even wish you good luck. Only thing I will